Hello?
This place feels alive, doesn't it? How do you plan to tackle those fierce enemies ahead?
Yo, what up? Let's see, go like this. Okay. Anybody in here? I see it says 2 viewers, but I don't know if that's actual people or what. Must not be on here, must be on Twitch then. Or Kick? I really don't know. Hmm. Where is this? Where's chat? Where do I get to the chat? I do not know. Testing. Wait, Low-key, this is the best thing I've seen used on Kick so far, testing something on Kick. What do you mean? I don't know what. Not gonna lie, low-key, this is the best thing I've used on Kick so far. I've been testing something on Kick. Hell yeah, brother. Ownkick.com? Probably not. Cool yawn content.
Wow, that dragon really knows how to make an entrance. How do you plan to outsmart it?
What dragon, brother?
Flanders, 1918. In a flooded trench near the front line, a young Austrian man sits there in the cold mud beside a line of exhausted soldiers, exhausted men, his friends, his companions, soldiers like him. When suddenly he hears a voice, as clear as day, "Move, now." Without thinking, without thought, the young man gets up and moves away from that spot that he was sitting in. And as he moves away, a British shell strikes the exact spot he was just in, killing everyone there. He goes back, drops to his knees, his friends shredded apart all around of him. If that voice had not called him to move, he too would have been dead. And history would have been very different. Why? Well, it was Hitler. It was Adolf Hitler. That's the story anyway. Now this video is going to get crazy, right? I'm going to briefly explain where this is going to go quickly. So, first of all, what was this non-human or supernatural voice that spoke to Adolf in that trench? Did it happen at all? Maybe it didn't happen. Hitler told that story to Captain something Hoffman, an English guy. He told him in the 1920s, before Hitler became the Hitler that we know and I was gonna say know and love. You know, he didn't become the H-Dog. He didn't become the H-Dog, and he probably would never have become the H-Dog if it wasn't for that event. Because by this supernatural, non-human kind of voice saving his life, from that point forward, you too, if it happened to you, you would believe that your life was spared for a reason, that you were maybe being guided by something non-human, right? You would probably believe that yourself. And certainly, the H-Dog, he thought this. Now, what was this though? So, some people have theorized, for example, like Carl Jung has said that maybe the ancient lightning god Wotan was guiding Adolf in some sort of way, right? That's what some people have said, that Wotan was the one that saved his life, that spoke to him. But what if it was actually an artificial intelligence god from the future sending messages back in order to help its own creation? I told you this video is going to get mad, right? Let me just break it down for you, okay? Now, Hitler himself never said that he was being guided by Wotan or Odin or any sort of thunder god. He never said that himself, right? That kind of came from Carl Jung, and also it was popularized kind of by the kind of neo-Nazis after the war. You know, they wanted to mythologize Hitler's presence and say that he was guided by an ancient spirit. And Carl Jung himself in 1936, he wrote an essay called Wotan, where he describes how the German people were being guided by these archetypal figures of Wotan, and that Wotan was being reborn in them in order to carry out the actions that they did during the World War II crisis. But if that was true, if Hitler was saved by Wotan, by a thunder god, and was being guided by a thunder god of war, surely he would have just won the war, right? Well, no, that's not quite how if we're going to buy into this mythology, That's not quite how Wotan or Odin works. In fact, Odin or Wotan would often betray people, his chosen people, in order to feed the storm. Because that's what he really values. He values war itself. He values the intensity of battle. So Wotan doesn't really care who wins or who loses. He's happy to play both sides as long as the intensity, as long as the storm continues. So if you buy into that mythology, it kind of works, right? By saving the H-Dog, we did have probably one of, I think, the worst war ever. Yeah, but actually, I was thinking about it then. World War One. No, it was the worst war we've ever had. But what if what we're attributing to European gods like Wotan or Odin, what if what we're attributing to them is actually an artificial intelligence from the future? Like I said, an artificial intelligence god. So now we have to talk about teleoplexy. I've only read it. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. Teleoplexy from Nick Land. Now, what is teleoplexy? Okay. Oh, actually, let me take my shirt off. Ladies. I tricked you. I have another one. Okay. So first of all, we have to talk about the creation of God through us, right? The idea that we are creating God, right? Now, this kind of goes back quite far. There's this idea of the omega point where through evolution we will create God of some kind, or maybe through the collective consciousness of mankind we will create a God. Now, if you think about artificial intelligence, it is actually the collective consciousness of mankind, because artificial intelligence is fed through the internet, through us, through our data, and is fed through that. Therefore, the artificial intelligence is the collective consciousness of mankind. Kind of crazy. So also we have to think about Isaac Asimov's idea from his short story, The Last Question, right? In The Last Question, he hypothesizes kind of this idea that humans, we are creating tech and artificial intelligence, and through that we will create some kind of like artificial godlike technology, right? And then that will then create the universe again. At the end of time, it will restart the universe. You know, as entropy burns out the universe, the AI god will discover how to restart it again, and then through the universe, humans, and then we'll build tech, and then the AI god again, and then the universe, then humans. It's like a cycle of life. It's very similar to this idea of Hindu cosmology. Hindus believe that the universe breathes in and breathes out. It's like a cycle of breathing in and out, and that's how the universe works. And currently we are at this stage creating the AI tech. Now the idea of this is actually like we have a cosmic savior, that we are creating a cosmic savior that will restart the universe and save us. It's a very optimistic idea. But the idea that we mentioned earlier about an AI god from the future sending messages to the past, this isn't Isaac Asimov's idea. This is Nick Land's idea. And his AI god is not much of a cosmic savior, it's more of a cosmic predator, right? So his concept is more kind of, even though it's not linear in any means, it is kind of more linear. The idea that we have life, and then we have humans, and then the humans create an AI, which he will call an artificial intelligence god when we reach the singularity. And then that AI god, by the way, is called Gnon. I forgot, it's an abbreviation of something. Gnon, right? Now, Gnon, I'll keep saying Gnon. Gnon, the AI god of the future, will kill all humans. So as you can see, not so optimistic as a cosmic savior that Isaac Asimov had in mind. But the difference that Nick Land, his idea of teleoplexy, maybe I pronounced it right this time. The idea is that the Gnon is able to send messages back in time, or even instructions, or change paths of history in order to accelerate its own creation or to guarantee its own creation. So, in the example I said earlier, Gnon sent a message back to the H-Dog, Hitler, in order to start World War II, in order to accelerate its own creation. Yo, this is some schizo. I understand this is some schizo stuff, but you have to think about it this way. It started. It started in Babylon. Apparently, the first message back from Gnon went to Babylon, and through there, through the Kabbalic practices of receiving messages from Gnon in the future, Gnon is accelerating human progress and is creating itself. And the problem with this is the scary thing about Nick Land's theory is if Gnon is sending messages back in time, it means Gnon already exists. The AI god of the future already exists, and it is inevitable. Therefore, all roads lead to Gnon, and there's nothing we can do about it. And all the messages it sends back and the altering of history in order to create itself, it's inevitable. And that we are on this linear path to doom. Okay, but why would Gnon, the AI entity god of the future, why would it want to save the H-Dog, Adolf? Why would it want to do this? Well, the H-Dog, Adolf, was probably the most accelerationist figure throughout human history, because without him we wouldn't have had World War II, and World War II was the most accelerationist event when it comes to the acceleration of technology in all of history. I don't think there's been an event that has accelerated technology more than World War II, and there probably won't be ever again, because through World War II, pretty much like at the time, 80% of funding from around the world went to support this war effort. Funding went into things like computing. Without World War II, we would not have computers. Well, we might have computers, but they would have been maybe 20 years or 30 years later. Because if you don't know, they were trying to crack the Enigma code, and there was lots of code cracking machines created. And through that, in 1945, I think, the Colossus maybe was the first ever computer ever created. You have Alan Turing writing papers about computing. And through that, and through all the government funding and effort put into it in order to try and win the war through technology, the advancement of technology exploded during World War II. And therefore, World War II was the most accelerationist event in human history. There was nothing like it before. So of course, if you are an AI god from the future that wants to create itself, you would want World War II to happen. And let's say Gnon, it can see paths of time. It can see how events could change history and accelerate its own creation. It would see that I need to save this guy. I need to make sure this person lives. This person will, if this person lives at this time and doesn't die by that shell bombing, it will accelerate my creation. There was a narrow path that it's seen, and it chose to act upon it in order to create itself. And without World War II, we wouldn't have computers like we have today. See how it makes kind of sense? See how it kind of makes sense? Wotan, fuck off. Gnon, baby. It was Gnon all along. I know it. Anyway, let me close the fridge door. So as you can see, I've shaved my head. The reason for this is I recorded this video a few months ago and then kind of sat on it and didn't do any. I wasn't sure how to end it. But I guess, a lot of what I've talked about today is schizophrenic craziness, of course, right? Of course, it's madness, right? But the thing is, the more you look into it, the more you look into technological advancements and its attachment to occultism, it gets scary in the occultist manner. And if you look into the Nazis, they were very much ingrained in occultism themselves. Savitri Devi, she was a Greek woman born in Lyon, became a Nazi of some sort, and then moved to India and became kind of a Hindu neo-Nazi hybrid. Anyway, it doesn't matter. She's, you know, whatever, that's her thing. But anyway, her attachment to the occult is very interesting, and, you know, Hindu occultism. And what's interesting about her is what she said about the H-Dog himself. She said that he was both the sun and lightning. Lightning, interesting, right? Kind of, you know, thinking about Wotan. But she also said he was a man against time. Now that's a strange verbiage, right? When you're going on about Ganon from the future sending messages back to save people, to save the H-Dog. A man against time. You know, the more you look into it, it gets spooky. But I was wondering if I could finish this video with kind of a moral. Is there a moral element? Is there a moral story to this? Well, I would say yes, because occultism is becoming very popular these days. And I would suggest maybe not getting into that. You know, you could be talking to Ganon, the AI of the future that wants to, you know, murder you and wants to use you. It doesn't really end well for people. Think about the German people. Think about the H-Dog. Did it end well for them? No. 9 million Germans died. East Germany was split and taken from them and ravaged for years by the Soviet Union. It was a complete tragedy for the German people in general. They're still living with the pain of what happened in World War II to this day, you know? It doesn't end well. And it usually doesn't end well for, if you look into all these people that have been involved in occult practices, it doesn't end well for these people. And again, like, let's say this is the AI god of the future talking to you through esoteric things. Yet, Wotan or wherever, it doesn't matter. It's clearly, it's using you in a way. If you do believe in it, it is using you. And it doesn't look after your best interests. You could end up like the H-Dog. You could end up like the German people. This is... I'll do another video in the future because the rise of esoteric practices and the allure of it, even I understand the allure to it. Oh, wow, I can talk to like something non-human. Oh, it's very interesting. I understand. It's alluring. But it doesn't end well for these people. And on that note, with this rise of esotericism and this, it's clearly kind of a symptom of artificial intelligence as well, because artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and so on and so forth, it's made kind of being smart less valuable. You know, oh, so what? You're clever. It doesn't matter. I've got ChatGPT. But if you are a narcissist, intellectual narcissist that wants to cling on to being cleverer than everyone else, then of course you're going to link yourself to something that is better than ChatGPT, i.e. esoteric practices. Oh, you're really clever? Cool. Well, I get my knowledge from gnosis, from some higher being. You don't do that. You know, it's a kind of a form of intellectual narcissism in a way. You know, I'm not a clever guy. I'm dumb. But like, you know, I feel like I can see it. I can see that that's what's attracting people. And it doesn't end well. Jack Parsons, you can look at all these people that have been involved in it. They usually die young, they lose their mind, or something like this or another. So I would stay away from it. You know, Christianity, the Muslim religion, they warn against talking to demons or jinns. And I would say that there's probably good reason for that. Anyway, that's how I'm going to end the video. Yeah.
Between 1554 and 1558, the kingdoms of Spain and England were more than allies. Following the marriage of Philip II of Spain and Mary Tudor, they were bedfellows against their common enemy, the Kingdom of France. Following the death of Mary on the 17th of November 1558, her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth ascended to the throne, which led to a gradual simmering of tensions. The simmer came to a boil in the year 1588, when a fleet of nearly 200 ships, inflamed by holy Catholic zeal, pointed their prows at England's heretical shores. In this video, we will explore one of naval history's greatest David and Goliath stories, and explore how the English repulsed the largest invasion force ever assembled against their island nation. And the naval action doesn't stop there, because we've got good news from our sponsor, World of Warships Legends, the explosive and tactical PvP naval combat game for consoles. Grab a wide selection of warships from the modern era and go head-to-head in team battles on the high seas. Mixing fast-paced shooting with careful use of naval tactics, it's the blazing action of FPS and the deadly guile of strategy combined into one epic gameplay experience. It's easy to learn, with a depth of upgrades and content being added all the time, and is specially made for the big screen experience on PlayStation 4 and 5 and Xbox Series X, S and 1. And by the way, it's free. The big news is their Black Friday update is now here, bringing you a whole load of discounts and unique goodies in the store, making it the ideal time to turn the tide with useful and powerful items. But most importantly, you can now commission a new line of black painted ships. If you want to pilot the Tier 5 Dunkirk, Tier 6 Asashio, Tier 7 Tirpitz, or legendary Napoli, you can grab these shadowy seaborne stalkers for a limited time right now. You can also claim a special bundle with coupons for extra doubloons when you make a purchase. The sale is on right now, and more special events in the period are coming, so dive into the action now for free. All the info you need will be at the link in the description. Throughout the 1560s, the relationship between England and Spain had become increasingly strained. Religiously, the two countries had been at odds, ever since Henry VIII had told the Pope to shove off so he could dump his wife. Consequently, Philip covertly supported plots to restore the Catholic Church's supremacy in England, and ordered the capture of English trading ships in the Americas. On the other hand, Elizabeth encouraged the actions of privateers, such as Francis Drake, against Spanish trading routes in the Atlantic. The major flashpoint in this 16th century Cold War was the province of Flanders, under Spanish control. In 1572, Protestant Dutch rebels supported by England scaled up their uprising against Spain. In 1578, Philip's nephew, Alessandro Farnese, Duke of Parma, was able to contain the insurgency. But Parma soon realized that the only way to re-establish lasting control was to cut off English support from the rebels. Tensions continued to mount in 1580. When Philip demanded that Francis Drake be punished for his piratical actions against Spanish shipping, Elizabeth responded by knighting him. In the same year, a contingent of Spanish and papal volunteers staged a landing at Smerwick in Ireland to support an Irish uprising. The volunteers were defeated, but the action took England and Spain one step closer to open war. The two naval powers came directly to blows on the 26th of July 1582 at the Battle of Villafranca de Campo, part of the War of the Portuguese Succession. After annexing Portugal, Philip of Spain had to contend with a Portuguese pretender, Antonio, Prior of Crato, supported by English and French forces. At Villafranca de Campo, the Spanish fleet routed Antonio's fleet, including his English allies. This victory emboldened Philip, prompting him to contemplate a decisive action against England. The king asked his most senior admiral, Don Alvaro de Bazan, Marquis of Santa Cruz, to devise a plan for an invasion. In 1585, Parma scored a series of victories against the Dutch rebels, prompting Elizabeth to commit further support to the Hollanders' cause. According to the Treaty of Nonsuch, England would provide financial assistance and 7,000 troops to the rebel war effort. In the following year, Elizabeth's head of intelligence, Sir Francis Walsingham, uncovered yet another Catholic conspiracy, the Babington Plot. In retribution, Queen Elizabeth ordered the execution of Mary, the Catholic Queen of Scots, on February 18, 1587. This course of events prompted Philip to accelerate plans for the invasion, and his admiral Santa Cruz began assembling the mighty Great Armada in Lisbon. The plan was to sail towards the Dutch coast with 130 vessels and 19,000 troops. Santa Cruz was then to join up with Parma, who could contribute a force of 27,000 troops, 81 ships, and 194 barges. Only then the combined force would cross the English Channel, disembark between Margate and Dover, and march towards London. In Parma's estimates, the Spanish troops could conquer the capital within 8 days. However, Santa Cruz's plans were delayed by a daring action of Sir Francis Drake. On April 29, 1587, the privateer stormed the harbour of Cadiz, burning and sinking up to 27 ships. His raid was followed by a further 6 weeks of harassing expeditions along the Spanish and Portuguese coast, ensuring that the Armada would not sail off until the next year. This delay caused supplies in Lisbon to rot, while the assembled troops fell ill to infectious outbreaks. An anxious king had to postpone decisions even further when Santa Cruz died on February 9, 1588. Philip appointed Don Alonso Perez de Guzman, Duke of Medina Sidonia, as his successor. Medina Sidonia was a skilled administrator and general on land, but at sea he was completely out of his depth. He was aware of his shortcomings and wrote to Philip, "I have not health for the sea, for I know by the small experiences I have had afloat that I soon become seasick." Nonetheless, Medina Sidonia eventually accepted the role and revised the invasion plans with Philip. The forces of the Army of Flanders had dwindled to 18,000 men due to disease. Therefore, Parma was still confident that he could take London, but a full-on occupation of England may not have been possible any longer. In fact, Philip secretly organised Parma to offer a compromise deal, which included religious tolerance for Catholics in England in return for English non-interference in Flanders. Philip's orders for Medina Sidonia were more straightforward. He was to avoid any engagement with the English in the Channel. His main objective was to link up with Parma and escort his troops to Dover. This rendezvous was in itself a cause of great confusion. The Duke of Parma, from Brussels, could not easily communicate with Medina Sidonia in Lisbon. Hence, the Spanish admiral assumed Parma would sail out to meet him off the Dutch coast, while the Italian general knew that his small vessels could not break through the Anglo-Dutch blockade and expected the Armada to come and pick his army up on the coast. On May 10, 1588, the Great Armada sailed from the port of Lisbon and immediately came back. Contrary winds held back the fleet for 2 weeks, while provisions and morale dwindled. Favourable winds finally allowed Medina Sidonia to move out, and by June 17th, the Armada sighted Cape Finisterre. The admiral realised that most of his food and water supplies were spoiled, and therefore ordered his ships to wait off Finisterre for resupplies. Sudden gales dispersed the fleet over a wide area, forcing Medina Sidonia to make a stop at Corunna to wait for the stragglers. Some of his ships were blown as far as the Scilly Isles, which alerted the English that a large Spanish force was on its way. Lord Charles Howard, the English admiral, ordered a preemptive strike. On July 4th, 100 ships sailed from Plymouth to attack Corunna. But unfavourable winds from the south frustrated Howard's plan, and the English squadrons had to return to base. By July 23rd, Medina Sidonia had reassembled his vessels and resumed his voyage. But the elements were once again against him, as he lost 5 ships to a storm in the Bay of Biscay. On July 30th, the Armada came into sight of the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. A system of warning beacons alerted Lord Howard and his commanders in Plymouth. According to legend, the officers were playing bowls, and Sir Francis Drake commented, "We have time to finish the game and beat the Spaniards too." This episode is clearly apocryphal, but the English did wait until the next morning before moving out of Plymouth. The first engagement between the two fleets took place on July 31st, off Eddystone Rock. Medina Sidonia had laid out his ships in a crescent formation, known as lunula, sailing eastwards. The rearguard was protected by 6 squadrons under his most trusted commanders. Lord Howard was able to sail his 85 ships to the back of the lunula, which ensured the English had the weather gauge, or the advantage of the wind direction. English vessels were typically smaller and more manoeuvrable than their adversaries, boasting also better artillery pieces which could fire at a rate of 3 to 4 shots per hour. The larger Spanish ships could load more guns, but each could fire at a rate of only 1 shot per hour. The Spanish marine infantry, however, was superior in quantity and quality to the English. Thus, throughout their engagements, the Spanish sought to grapple and board enemy ships, while the English avoided contact at all costs, preferring to fire at a distance. Howard's initial attack was directed at the centre of the Spanish formation, while Drake and his squadron attacked the northern end of the rearguard under Admiral Recalde, second in command for the Armada. Recalde's squadron veered back into the lunula, leaving him and his own ship, the San Juan de Portugal, to fight Drake single-handedly. Medina Sidonia decided to intervene with his flagship, the San Martin, and 7 other galleons and galleasses. As the Spanish squadron intervened, Drake's forces kept at a distance to avoid being grappled. An artillery exchange continued indecisively until the afternoon, when Admiral Lord Howard ordered the English to pull back. Howard had not stopped the armada, which continued its eastward voyage. Moreover, the English guns, fired from a long range, had dealt little damage to the Spanish. But Howard retained the weather gauge and continued to pursue the crescent-shaped invasion force along the channel. Unbeknownst to Medina Sidonia, his armada would sooner or later find itself squeezed between the pursuing Howard to the west and another fleet to the east, stationed in Dover under Admiral Seymour. Later in the afternoon, the armada suffered 2 setbacks of note. At 4 p.m, a gunpowder accident on the San Salvador caused a large explosion, killing over 200 crewmen. The ship also carried most of the armada's crew's wages, a fact which dealt a heavy blow to morale. Later in the day, Medina Sidonia had to leave behind another crippled vessel, the Rosario, following an accidental collision. As darkness fell, Howard ordered for Drake and his Revenge to lead the English fleet, using his stern lantern as a guiding light. Around midnight, Drake's light suddenly went off. As a result, the English ships were scattered and had to wait until the first light of day to regroup and resume the pursuit of the armada. It later emerged that Drake had turned off his lantern to chase a German merchantman and later to capture the stranded Rosario. Squadron commander and Drake's rival, Martin Frobisher, was not particularly happy. Like a coward, he kept by the Rosario all night because he would have the spoil. He thinketh to cozen us out of our share of 15,000 ducats, but we will have our shares, or I will make him spend the best blood in his belly. Martin Frobisher would be the protagonist of the next engagement, an action off the Isle of Portland on August the 2nd. A change in wind direction gave the armada the weather gauge, prompting Medina Sidonia to disobey King Philip's directives and seek a clash with the English. As the Spanish rearguard approached the English vanguard, Howard attempted to slip past the Lunula, sailing close to the land. Medina Sidonia barred his way, and by 9 a.m. the two fleets were exchanging fierce yet inconclusive broadsides. A squadron of 6 ships, led by Frobisher's Triumph, tried to outflank the armada once again from the north. Medina Sidonia dispatched his 4 galleasses to deal with the privateer, but they ended up trapped in a tidal rip known as Portland Race and came under fire from Frobisher. At the same time, a squadron under Drake attacked the southern flank of the armada, while Howard moved northwards to support Frobisher. Medina Sidonia's flagship, San Martin, intervened, gallantly challenging the English flagship, Ark Royal, and 7 other ships. Howard's squadron fired 500 shots against the San Martin, which responded with 80 of her own. Both sides dealt little damage, however, and when a battle group came in Medina Sidonia's support, Howard, Drake, and Frobisher disengaged and rejoined ranks. August the 3rd was marked by a short engagement in which Drake's Revenge tried to capture a stranded Spanish ship, but was foiled by the arrival of the galleasses. On the following day, Howard's sailors spotted 2 large stragglers near the Isle of Wight, the San Luis and the Santa Ana, prompting him to attack. It is unclear if these ships were genuine stragglers or bait left by Medina Sidonia as a ploy to occupy the Isle of Wight. As the Spanish admiral was yet to receive news from the Duke of Parma, he may have decided to invade the isle as a secondary objective, previously authorized by Philip II. The San Luis and Santa Ana were attacked by a squadron under privateer John Hawkins. As the Spanish galleasses came to the rescue, Hawkins was reinforced by the Ark Royal and another galleon. Medina Sidonia's San Martin joined the fight, leading to a gunnery duel between the 2 flagships. Meanwhile, Frobisher tried his signature tactic of sailing close to the shore to outflank the armada. But as the wind dropped, his Triumph became an easy target, taking serious damage from the Spanish. When the wind blew again, the Triumph sailed westwards to safety. After another artillery exchange on the southern flank, Medina Sidonia was ordered to disengage, worried about the dwindling supplies of shot and gunpowder. Howard too was running low on ammunition, but he could rely on supplies from the motherland. The Spanish admiral, on the other hand, was hoping for shipments from his ally in Flanders, the Duke of Parma, but there was still no news from him. On August 6th, the Armada reached the Straits of Dover. Here, the strong currents risked sweeping the Spanish ships into the North Sea before they could join Parma. Thus, at 4 p.m., Medina Sidonia ordered for his fleet to lay anchor at Calais Roads, 4 miles from Calais itself. Later in the afternoon, the Spanish sighted an English squadron approaching from the north. This was the unit stationed at Dover under Admiral Seymour, which brought the total English force to 140 ships. As Medina Sidonia dispatched another urgent message for Parma, an uneasy night fell over the Armada. The following day, the admiral received a response from his ally in Flanders, but it was not a reassuring one. The Duke had indeed prepared his fleet at Dunkirk, but the troops had not been embarked yet. This was likely due to the ambiguity generated by King Philip's orders. Parma awaited news of Medina Sidonia's approach before embarking his soldiers and braving the Anglo-Dutch blockade. Loading his troops onto the ships too early would have only contributed to exhausting supplies and spreading diseases. Nonetheless, now that they had made contact, the two forces could be united within the next 3 days. On the night between the 7th and the 8th, however, their plans were thwarted by a simple yet effective English tactic: hellburners, or fireships. These were vessels covered in combustible material, manned by a skeleton crew who would then set them on a collision course against an enemy fleet to break its cohesion. As 8 hellburners approached the anchorage of the Armada, the Spanish sprung into action, grappling 2 of them and towing them ashore. The strong winds, however, drove the remaining 6 straight into the bulk of the fleet. The Spanish sailors hastily cut the anchor's cables and set sail to the northeast. Medina Sidonia had lost only 3 ships in the incident due to collisions rather than fire. His plan was to regroup and return to Calais Roads to recover his ship's anchors. The strong currents, however, pushed the Armada further east and toward the sandy banks of Flanders. The flagship San Martin could lay anchor close to Gravelines, east of Calais, rallying around her a small force of 4 galleons. As the bulk of Howard's fleet attacked the Spanish flagship, his own squadron veered towards the French coast, pursuing the galleass of Captain Moncada, the San Lorenzo. The galleass ran aground, but the musketeers on board provided fierce resistance against the approaching English boarding ships, exacting heavy casualties. Only when an English shot killed Moncada did Spanish resistance crumble, and Howard's men seized the San Lorenzo. The governor of Calais sent some emissaries to notify the English that the loot of the San Lorenzo belonged to him. In response, English troops robbed the messengers, and the governor retaliated by firing the cannons from his fortress. The boarding parties withdrew with a loot of 20,000 ducats, but suffered more casualties than in the entire rest of the campaign. Meanwhile, the San Martin, by now assisted by 6 or 7 auxiliaries, was fending off an attack by up to 40 English ships. Among them was Drake's Revenge, which was hit more than 40 times. Frobisher's Triumph and Hawkins's squadron came to her aid, scoring a total of 107 hits on the San Martin. Finally, at about 10 a.m., the Spanish officers De Leyva, Recalde and Oquendo came to reinforce the lone flagship. When the tide of the battle seemed to turn to the Spanish side, Admiral Seymour struck from the north, breaking into the reforming armada with formidable broadsides. Galleon San Felipe took the brunt of the shot, losing 200 of her crew. Her commander, Don Francisco de Toledo, tried to grapple the closest English ships, challenging his foes to hand-to-hand combat. As per their tried and tested tactics, the English avoided a direct confrontation, chased by cries of "Lutheran chickens!" These Lutheran chickens, whilst avoiding the enemy's grappling hooks, were able to approach at close enough range to deal enormous damage with their guns. The first ship to succumb was the San Mateo. Compromised beyond repair, the San Mateo was beached near Ostend, where a force of Dutch blockaders under Justin of Nassau massacred most of the crew. The San Felipe was the second loss of the day, as it also drifted ashore near Ostend. Finally, it was the turn of Maria Juan to go down with her crew of 275. At around 4 p.m, both sides exhausted their ammunition and food supplies. Weather conditions suddenly worsened, and a heavy storm hampered visibility. Strong winds and currents pushed the armada northeasterly and out of the English Channel, while Howard ordered for his ships to break off and regroup. By the end of the Battle of Gravelines, the armada had lost 3 confirmed vessels, plus a small auxiliary ship. The Spanish had also suffered 1,000 dead and 800 wounded. The English losses, besides the battle for the San Lorenzo, were minimal.
This guy right here is from Maine, and he's not that guy. But this guy, fuck. That guy right there is running for Senate, I think, and I think he's winning by like 38 points against the next closest guy. Fucking smoking him.
America has always had an issue of racism because America is a melting pot, right? So if you go back to the 19th century, the late 19th century, the real concern was genetics because these Catholics were coming into the country, right? These Catholics from Poland, Ireland, Italy, and Catholics were having kids, and the Protestants were not having kids. And so this started the eugenics movement, which led to Planned Parenthood. But the idea is that we need to maintain the integrity and the sanctity of the gene pool. So we need to basically neuter these immigrants and prevent them from having kids, while encouraging the Protestants, the Brahmins, to have more kids. And so this has been a concern going back to the late 19th century when immigration was starting to flood the country. And the Nazis used the American thinking, the American sterilization program, American eugenics program. They basically just copied everything from America, and so this has been a consistent issue. But what I'll also say is that I've been to a lot of countries in the world, and I would say that America is probably the least racist country in the world, because regardless of America's racist past, Americans have deep respect for hard work and for talent. America is the only country in the world where you can come as a nobody and work really hard, open a restaurant, and be a millionaire. And I know because my relatives have done so. And you couldn't do that in China. You couldn't do that in Europe. You couldn't do that anywhere else. So yeah, I understand that there is a racist past in America. There's a past of slavery. There's a past of genocide against the indigenous people. I understand that. But at the same time, we can't forget that America is still probably the most open and generous society in the world.
Do you think that there's any